Hi, I'm Ryan Davis,
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
and this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Hey, Kiernan.
Ryan, you do not want this seat next to me. I'm just forewarning you.
I'd be sitting 6 feet away.
I'm testing. I've got the mask, but you know what? 3 years on since my last bout, you might be able to hear it in my voice. Unfortunately, I currently have a case of COVID.
That's incredible. I didn't even know it was still legal to get COVID. So good for you.
It's such a throwback. I'm always either behind or ahead, and in this case, I'm being quite retro. It feels a very retro experience here. This is what I get for going on a giant Alaskan Pacific Northwest trip.
Well, I hope you were feeling good up until the end of the trip.
Oh, yeah. You know what? Good point. We did not experience any symptoms until we were home after many, many days away. So, yes, you're right. Very lucky. It was a good trip. Certainly going to be fodder for good upcoming episodes, Ryan. Let me tell you the episodes I've got in the can here from this trip. One, definitely going to be able to do that traveling with parents, which we've had requested so many times. No, I'm sorry. Oh, the COVID brain. We're definitely going to be able to do the traveling with children. Well, I guess it is also inherently traveling with parents, but it's not going to be a kid-focused podcast.
After just traveling with my mom around a bit, I think traveling with older parents is actually not a bad idea.
Well, I'm going to London with my mom in August, so that could be a follow-up. But traveling with children. We got a great time in Seattle. Did some of the kind of secondary and off the beaten path stuff because I had done the big stuff in Seattle several times. So I think there's a Seattle follow-up episode. Then the Inner Passage of Alaska. We got Juneau, Sitka, Skagway. Awesome, awesome trips to be taking. And then going on one of these giant cruises. I mean, that is an experience unto itself that I'm interested in talking about. Whether it's enough for its own spin-off episode or not, I'm still figuring out. But this is going to be loads of great content on top of what we already have in the can about Pacific Northwest and Alaska.
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, there can never be too much Alaska content. I'm very jealous of your Alaska adventures.
I forget. Have you been? You have not been to Alaska yet.
Oh, I haven't been to either of those two states. Hanging around the continental. So I'd love to go out there.
This definitely made me fall completely back in love with Alaska. It is essentially a foreign country. It's got such a culture unto itself, and it's the way of life there is just so different. Nobody lives there for convenience, but the natural beauty just is incomparable. It's one of the most special places in the world.
Did you have a chance to jump over to Russia while you were there, or did you just kind of see it from?
I had the binoculars, so of course
you need binoculars.
I was sort of monitoring what was going on. Yeah. And I did go to the Capitol building. I shot a little picture of Sarah Palin's picture in the Hall of Governors there.
That's amazing.
So we'll save that for the Juneau episode. But I mean, today we're gonna go even further afield. This is our follow-up to the first trip to Rome. This is going to be the Rome follow-up, really completing a big series that we have on Italy for folks who are heading there this summer. But Ryan, I have to say, I still don't know where you are. I believe you're still in the United States, but for all I know, you could be in Mexico or back in South America. Where are you? This is the Judy alert for your mom, Judy.
Well, this is my last day actually in Ocean City, Maryland.
Judy must be so upset.
She is so upset, but I'm recording this at this cool. We don't usually record at cafes, but today, we were going back and forth on the schedule, so I'm actually recording this on at this place called Stoke Cafe in Ocean City, which is like a surf and yoga themed coffee shop. I do neither of those things, but I do drink a lot of coffee, and they have great Wi-Fi. So shout out to Stoke Cafe.
Absolutely. Well, that's very cool. I'm sad. And where are you off to next?
Off to DC for a couple of days. Going to check out one of DC's great restaurants, the Dabney. I've never been to. Super excited for that. And then off to Mexico. I think I'm going to go horseback riding on the beach for the July 4th weekend, and then
what? Hold on. Have you ever been on a horse?
I've been on a horse, but not for like a long time. And like and not like
Like, how long we talking?
I'm talking, like let's say I'm 43, and the last time I was on a horse, I was 11. So it's been a
Oh,
couple
wow.
years.
Okay, this is gonna be, something,
A
and
nightmare. It's
what
gonna
is
be a nightmare.
inspiring you? I feel like on a beach is even more risky.
Yeah, well, I'm not like it was literally like my friend was like, "Hey, I wanna do this," and then my choice was either to be like, I'm petrified of heights and horses and beaches, or to do it. So this is one of these situations where I'm just gonna go along and pretend I'm like a normal person, and then, hopefully the Instagram photo of me and the horse, I'll look like more like, Kevin Costner than, myself.
I mean, I'm sure you'll be able to take listen, the Ozempic's been doing its
Yeah,
work. So, I think you have a better chance than not of some photogenic moments. But,
yeah.
I'm just
The
thinking to
horse won't mind me anymore, at least,
sure. I'm well, and you're easier to buck also.
Yeah,
But by the way, that was buck with a B, Ryan.
yeah.
I think in all likelihood, it's going to be a magical experience when you're standing still. It's the movement that I'm worried about.
Yeah, it's only like an hour of movement, so I'm hoping it's not too much, but I just know that my friend who, is, more athletic than me and more graceful is gonna be, look amazing on this horse, and I'm gonna be, you know,
Yeah, near him.
near him, and
That
not that
that
close,
tends to be your way. Yeah,
because he'll be galloping, and I'll be barely trotting, whatever the
sure.
horse speeds are,
That's okay. I think you've got it. Well, I look forward to the full recounting that. And then when do you? I assume South America is next.
Yeah, then I'm off to Bogota, and, I'm actually a good friend of mine from Mexico is coming to visit, in Bogota, so we're gonna do this sort of, like, Colombia tour, for him. So we're gonna hit, Medellin, Cartagena, Santa Marta, all of this in July. So it's gonna be a fun July, and we've never done an episode on Santa Marta, so I think we might get a Santa Marta, Colombia episode pretty soon.
That sounds great. And what do you is the plan then? Because you've just done your big Europe trip. Are you mostly going to be settled in South America for a while then?
Yeah, the plan is for, July and August to pretty much be sitting, hanging out in Colombia, maybe doing some weekend stuff, and then I'm off to Europe for a wedding of a mutual friend in September.
Excellent. That's it's going to be great. That's right. That's Ireland, and then I believe back into the U.S. sometime in the fall.
Yeah, sometime in September, TBD. We'll have to see.
I'm still
Yeah.
hoping to be able to figure out a time for us to take a little trip, and October as well. No,
Maybe we'll see. We'll see.
okay, keeping it
Yeah,
loose.
but you can always, we can always do a weekend in Santa Marta. We can go to Boulevard's, the house he died in. Let me know.
God, it's so romantic. All right. Well, Ryan. Well, now that we're feeling fully read up, and I think it's exciting that we were able to recount and catch up for everybody, give a preview of all the episodes that we're going to have. We didn't want to delay Rome Part 2 because we had such a good time on Rome Part 1. So I think it's time for us to take off, maybe put on our bishops' miters, and get to Rome.
Tell the cabin crew.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
All right, Ryan. Now you may recall the previous the first trip to Rome was just a few weeks ago, and just before that we did the Vatican. So there's a whole little trilogy here, true to my Star Wars passion, a trilogy right around any trip to Rome. And then we also have two interviews with an Italy expert named Fred Plotkin, who came on to talk about food and drink. He had co-written a book with Rick Steves about the food of Italy, and came on to share just wonderful anecdotes of his decades of work in Italy. So, and actually, I'm aiming to have Fred come back for a third to talk just about the espresso culture in Italy, because I think that's there's a great romance to it. There's a lot of care that they give, and it has really informed how the United States and really the world drinks coffee. So it'd be fun to get him back this summer, maybe early fall. But today, I want to focus on a few of the sites that we just didn't have time for. We're going to cover a couple of museums, a couple of the kind of quirkier places that if you're not pressed for time, I think you should they're worthy of a stopover. Of course, we're going to talk a few churches and Catholic stuff. And then just two quick overviews of a neat neighborhood that I would recommend you make time for called Trastevere. and then a short day trip away. It's just a 45-minute train ride out of Rome to what was a Roman port city that kind of has some of the romance and archaeological draws of like a Pompeii, but much closer to Rome. So it's going to be a packed episode, but I think we can get through it if we stay focused.
I think we can stay focused, Kieran.
All right.
Let's do it. Let's dive into Rome. I'm excited to go back. And oh gosh, there was a really funny viral video I will post in the comments from last week. A little girl was with her family somewhere in Italy, and she gets this pizza put in front of her, and she starts screaming, "But it's not Papa John's!"
Just to be clear, when you say you're going to post it in the comments, now what does that refer to?
In the show notes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. Are we calling that the comments nowadays?
No, I watch so many podcasts where they have they have YouTube, and so they say things like, "We'll post in the comments."
We've got YouTube, regularly getting 2 to 5 views on those YouTube posts.
We are the Joe Rogan of the left, collectively.
All right, Ryan. Well, the first 2 museums I want to kick off talking about that I was desperate to fit into the first episode because I really think that they require, even on your first trip, they deserve to be in it if you've got the time. The first is the Capitoline Museums, and the second is the National Museum of Rome. Now, the Capitoline Museums are on the tourist track, really very accessible. If you're exploring that main kind of Vatican Forum area that we covered, the Capitoline Museums, you need a couple hours. There's a few sort of big blockbuster things that you're going to want to see. But I really feel like even if you only have an hour, it's worth it to squeeze it in to see the blockbuster pieces. So I'm going to tell you a few of those. And then if you have a little bit longer, certainly worth the browse. The first is, it's interesting to know, some actually claim that this museum may actually be the oldest museum in the world. It was founded in 1471 and has continued to be a museum since. And this is basically when...
That's incredible.
It's crazy.
So early on.
But it's basically when the church started to realize the historical value of all the Roman artifacts that were around. At that point, so many had been incorporated into Catholic church buildings. But those that were still being discovered were being preserved in these 2 giant buildings, which are the same giant buildings today that you'll be exploring. Lots of classic Roman sculpture, but you really get a snapshot at both of these museums, the Capitoline Museums and the National Museum of Rome. You get a real snapshot of art across the full historical trajectory of Rome. One piece that really sticks out in my mind, it doesn't go chronologically, but when you enter into this courtyard of the museum, you're met with all of these enormous body parts, a giant foot, an enormous hand, part of a head. And these are parts of an enormous statue of Constantine that I believe is estimated to have been about 30 feet large and disintegrated over time because while certain parts were marble, other parts were not. And so now you just kind of have the remainder parts. But the foot, the hand, the head alone are enough to conjure up what it would have been to see this in all of its glory. And I think it's such a... It gets you immediately into the mood of appreciating for sort of the propaganda value of a lot of this art that the rulers in Rome had, because you could think about how imposing this would have been, and how lucky again we are that these artworks were made so solidly that even when they're broken, disintegrated, they're extremely emotive. I could kind of sit and look at that foot and the artistry of it and how accurate it is to real human beings for quite a while. So it's a great way to enter the Capitoline Museums.
That sounds incredible. This didn't even come up in my initial search of Rome. So this is what it's like to go deep, Kieran.
I mean, I know there's going to be one work particularly that you're going to be sad to have missed, and I know you're going to head back almost exclusively for this. I'll get to that's not next. Into. So next up is certainly a piece of art that you're familiar with, but you didn't see when you were in Rome, which is the original she-wolf statue that the iconography of Rome with the she-wolf kind of with the head turned with with two babies underneath suckling. That classic image, the original statue, which is from the 1200s, is at the Capitoline Museums. And so, there is something special about seeing the origin point of this national symbol.
The symbol you see all over the place. That's very cool.
Now, you're going to see a lot of emperors and historical figures represented in busts. There's one very famous room that's completely packed with busts that has famous people from Greek history, Socrates, etc., and emperors. Personally, I really need the artistic placards to tell me which emperor it is. I'm there are certain emperors who have certain ways that they're represented in art that you can hook on to, but I don't know if you experience the same problem. Sometimes the Roman heads, I'm like, oh, that's Julius Caesar. It's not. It's Augustus. Oh, that's Julius. I always lead with that's Julius Caesar, as I think most of us do.
Well, I'm Marcus Aurelius guy, so I'm always looking for Marcus. But I do think everyone
Ryan,
is Julius Caesar.
you beat me to the punch there. So one of the greatest statues, and it's considered the best preserved statue of a figure on a horse from ancient Rome, is this quite grand, very large, extremely well preserved sculpture of Marcus Aurelius atop a horse, looking the grand emperor philosopher that he was. So this has Ryan Davis written all over it.
I need to take a look at this, because when I'm on that horse on the beach in Mexico,
oh my gosh,
this is what I'm going to be projecting.
That's a great idea. Now, Marcus
I thought it was going to be a little more like Bolivar's or maybe Ulysses S. Grant sort of vibes, but yeah, I can see this now. More Marcus Aurelius vibes.
I mean, Marcus Aurelius is looking very confident atop the horse, so you may have to do a bit of rehearsal.
Yeah, I mean, he probably rode a bit more than me as a kid.
Now, he also had a son named Commodus, and Commodus
not great, guys. Not a great guy. Not
no,
well.
I pick him up as kind of an imperial brat from what I've heard. But there's a very memorable piece where it's a bust of him, and he's got a lion's skin around him with the head of the lion on his own head, almost like a Halloween sort of mask. And this imagery you do see across different pieces of Roman art, and this is where the powerful people were trying to represent themselves as as Hercules, because Hercules famously slayed this lion, wore the skin. You can usually recognize Hercules in sculpture because of the lion skin, and here Marcus Aurelius's son has donned it.
That is something to see. Yeah, that's cool. I really want to know more about them and their relationship, and how power was handed over. So interesting stuff here, Nick.
And again, if you're pressed for time, one of the other places that I would push for you to, one of the other pieces that I just think you should take a moment to appreciate is a Roman sculpture that's after a Greek original, which is called the Capitoline Venus. And this is very much just like we all picture the Botticelli Venus. It is recognizable as the goddess Venus. Looking very beautiful, very perfect beauty represented in the sculptural form. But this is one of the best preserved Venuses that went on to inform a lot of the art that followed, and it's the best reflection we have of the original Greek version.
So many treasures. I find these museums kind of to be overwhelming.
They are overwhelming. That's why I think it's best to have like a few signpost pieces that you're searching out, and then enjoying the walk in between them. I mean, that's really where it comes to. So these are the ones that you'll see on the postcards.
Yeah, I think sometimes I feel like people have this anxiety about museums where they feel like they have to spend a certain amount of time with every piece, and I feel like, folks, you don't have to do that.
Yeah, agreed.
There's so much to see. Spend time with what pulls you in, what you want to see. Don't feel obligated to like give every piece its due. It's just not. There's not enough time in the world.
Well, and that's certainly true too of the National Museum of Rome. I do feel like this is kind of a bit of an overlooked museum. Like I don't see it in the top 10 ranking of things to do in Rome, but I think it deserves. It really is because of the abundance of riches that you're mentioning. What I would recommend focusing on here is do a bit of reading beforehand on the number of emperors and how they're distinguished from each other in Roman history. You know, we had the recommendation of some of the Mary Beard books, which I think give a good overview. But you know, if you don't have the time for that, you can certainly do some Wikipedia reading. You can get a couple podcasts that summarize the lives of the emperors. But the National Museum of Rome has great representation of the major emperors that many of us have heard of. So there's a lot of Caesar, there's a lot of Augustus, his adopted son, who really is the emperor who created the empire. You know, Julius Caesar is the one who kind of transferred from democracy to empire, but it was Augustus who created all the systems and processes to allow it to grow in the way that it did. You also get a lot of representations of women in the Roman world. Augustus's wife Livia is well represented in sculpture. You get some of the great philosophers. There's a fantastic Socrates that is the classic kind of bald, bearded, inspiring figure that makes you feel like you should go back to school. Um, there's a representation of Trajan, of Trajan's column fame that we discussed in the last episode, that famous battle column that you can visit near the Forum.
That column's incredible. So they've got like a smaller reproduction.
No, it's not the column itself. It's a representation of Trajan himself.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, and that's what you're largely getting. And this is a place where if you suffer from the sort of problem I do of trying to identify these different emperors, you get to see them all in close, well laid out, well lit succession at the National Museum of Rome. So here's a place where you can try to get a little smarter on that front. Hadrian is represented there. Hadrian is kind of the emperor who I think is most recognized for exploring all the furthest reaches of the empire. There's famously Hadrian's Wall in the north of England, which is the extent of the empire at that time that he actually went to himself.
Yeah, Hadrian is one of the great travelers. I think we should do a whole episode on him and his travels because he would basically go around and see things that he liked in other cities and be like, "Build me this here." You know?
Yeah, no, you're right, and I like that idea too because I know when I was traveling in Croatia, there are certain emperors who made a point of focusing on representing Rome's power in their acquired lands by building palaces there, temples there, and that was very clear on in Split, Croatia. So it would be fun to do an episode that's focused just on a couple of those emperors who were focused on the furthest reaches. Another emperor who I like to pinpoint. Now, I mentioned Trajan. Trajan was actually born in Spain, so it's interesting that the Roman emperor didn't always have to come from Italy or Rome. And another one to point out here that I've always found interesting is an emperor named Septimus Severus, and he is often in the literature described as the African emperor. But I was just doing a little research for the episode, and he was born in what is today Libya. And he has an interesting biography himself. But what is particularly of interest to me is my wife, who's a classicist, has always wanted a few Roman coins. And a few years back, for a Christmas present, her mother and I got her two Roman coins. One of us got her Septimus Severus, and the other got Septimus Severus's wife, Julia Domna, who, again, if you're seeking to understand the lives of women in the Roman Empire, Julia Domna is a very interesting figure. And she is one who actually I can usually spot because she's usually shown with a very large mess of curls atop her head. Uh, so we have a little coin in our house that represents that, and you will be able to see that here at the National Museum of Rome as well.
That's fantastic. I mean, there's so much to see there that it sounds like will add to the context of everything you're seeing in Rome.
Yeah, and there's another famous sculpture that I know you'd want to search out, especially for its representation of the male form, which is the discus thrower. You know, that famous kind of winding up to throw the disc, very muscular. That is fully the original is here in the National Museum of Rome.
I do love a discus thrower. I think the discus is something, sort of ultimate frisbee of its day.
And the final piece that I think is interesting, that amidst all of these Roman emperors, you do have a representation of Jesus. It's not kind of the Jesus that we see in churches today, the bearded. It looks a little more, I'd say, anodyne. You wouldn't necessarily be able to recognize it, but you will start to see the influence of Christianity coming into Rome. And so you have the nice dichotomy of the Roman history, its rise, its fall, a long list of emperors, and then that sort of post-Roman Empire period where Christianity became tolerated, and then the official religion, and then where representations of Jesus became more mainstream.
It's really interesting to see that because obviously the Renaissance gave us such a specific picture. So that's cool.
So beyond the museums, I want to spotlight three quirky places that you're going to be passing by as you do a lot of the tourist track. So it's worth taking time to stop in. The first is a place called the Capuchin Crypt. It's in the bottom of the Church of Santa Maria della Immacolata Concezione, which means the Church of the Immaculate Conception of Mary. And this is capuchins. You know, cappuccinos are named after capuchins because it's got the white top and the brown underneath. These are the classic friars who wear the brown robes. Even today, they wear the brown robes out in society, and they've got that tonsure, that bald spot that they put on the top of their heads. Maybe not today, but classically, they're
Uh,
represented as that.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Conan.
I wasn't going to reference anything further. It's just that's what the fact of it. And in the 1700s, this crypt was decorated with the bones of 4,000. Uh, in the 1700s, this crypt was decorated with the bones of 4,000 Capuchin friars. The actual bones, the skeletons taken apart, and these bones were basically used as decorative material. And when I tell you it is packed with bone, I mean, this is one of the most macabre places you could possibly visit. There are 6 adjoining rooms that you walk through, and there are bones on every surface, the ceiling, the walls. There's artworks made of bones. There's chandeliers made of bones. There's scenes like a grim reaper that seems to be judging your sinfulness. There's a clock with no hands. It's like it's kind of Twilight Zone-y. And there's a saying on the wall that I think really captures what they're trying to what the Capuchins were trying to tell us here. And the phrase is, "What you are now, we used to be. What we are now, you will be."
That's the Latin way, right? What's mental mori?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's right. It's showing you the reality of death, but I'll also say there's no question in my mind that those who were creating this art were being cheeky. It is funny, and I have to believe in seeing the designs there and how almost like flip some of the use of vertebrae and ribs and clavicles are. I do think that some very odd Capuchin friar was having the time of their life, was having the time of his life.
That is that is something funny to think about.
There's another church. Oh God, there's so many churches called the Church of Santa Maria. So you're going to have to do some Googling, and I will do links in the show notes as always to help you find these things. But at another Church of Santa Maria, this is a site that the church does have to be open. It's typically open, but you should check the hours of the church to be sure the outside gates are open. On the porch, the portico area of the church, there is a massive mask. It's basically eyes and nose and mouth punched into a huge disc of rock. And it is a representation of an ocean god named Oceanus. And it's theorized this came from a Roman temple, possibly a temple to Hercules. But this became famous from that 1950s movie Roman Holiday, with Audrey Hepburn, where this is where there's a famous legend. This legend has apparently been around since medieval times, that if you stick your hand into the hole of the mouth and you tell a lie, it will bite your hand off. So it's called the mouth of truth, or the Bocca della Verita. And so this is, you can go there, recreate that scene. It's also just a beautiful piece. It feels very Roman original. It looks like it should be preserved in a museum, and instead it's just kind of perched up outside this church. And from what I understand, it was likely removed from that temple, leaned up against the wall in this church, eventually found a permanent home outside, and then became famous. And this legend has survived, almost 1,000 years.
Well, I definitely do not want to stick my hand in that, Kieran, and I don't want to risk it.
And that's fairly rare for you to say. You're pretty brave about putting your hands in places that I
All
wouldn't.
right. It's a family show.
Now, there's another place, Ryan, that I know that you would like, which is this I happened upon when I was just out walking around Rome. Again, it's in a pretty central area. So you're not going to have a problem finding it. And it is known as the Cat Ruins. It's basically a series of 4 temples that sit 20 feet below modern street level. So you'll be walking on the street or sidewalk and you see a railing and you actually look down into these temples, and they're ruins. I mean, they're very clearly ruins. Pillars half formed, little remnants of walls. But what's interesting here is that while it was unearthed in 1929, apparently during Mussolini's sort of rebuilding of Rome, it has been preserved down below. It hasn't been taken up and put into a museum. And it's actually been turned over to the cats, I would say. There is a cat sanctuary that essentially, I mean, I don't know if it's official or unofficial, but they allow the cats to roam these ruins. And so you can stand and sit from the street, and there's apparently about 150 cats that use this. It goes up and down the population, but these are cats who are cared for by a local volunteer group, and they live among the ruins. So it is very quirky, and you can get some fun photos of, these very
I
pretty
love it.
cats sitting on broken Roman pillars.
Yeah, I love it. I love wild cats, very Istanbul vibes. That's cool. I'm into that. I would have actually gone to that because I like cats and I like ruins, and the combination of those would have been interesting.
This was one of those accidental wonders that you can find if you do take some time to simply wander. By the way, the official name of it is Largo di Torre Argentina. But, if you're staying at a hotel and describe, I'm looking for the cat ruins, they're going to help you find it. And we will link in the show notes. Similar to it just being able to find amazing things roaming, I do want to encourage you to take time to visit a neighborhood called Trastevere. I think that this is much more a real world neighborhood. It's still extremely picturesque. But what's nice about it is it takes you a little step away from the tourist track. It's very close, very walkable. You have to actually cross a bridge across the Tiber River. So it gives you a sense of this central waterway that made Rome as important as it is. But this is a neighborhood where real people function and where you're not going to be surrounded by just visitors to Rome. And so wandering the streets, get an espresso, have a leisurely lunch sitting out, drinking a spritz on an ancient courtyard. This is a place to just soak up the atmosphere. But of course, I can't resist pointing you to a church as well. And of course, that church is also named. This is the third Church of Santa Maria, but this one's in Trastevere. This church actually dates back. This place was, I think, a secret place of Christian worship, and then eventually a public place since 313, the year 313. And the church that is now there, while it's not as old as 313, it does date from the 12th century. And so it's a great example of where you can see scavenged pieces of Roman temples built into a Christian church. So the pillars, particularly, you can recognize how they're different from one another, and you can see that they came from several different places. But the real artistic treasure here that has stuck with me for just years is this beautiful mosaic that is gold and huge, and it represents uh, Jesus and Mary together, really with this sense of this is like the king and queen because they're looking so grand. And the apostles are represented below as sheep, which I think is kind of has a little bit of a Disney vibe in my field. But there, 12 sheep there being cared for. And then there's lovely mosaics that show particularly the life of Mary. And so you see this, the honoring of Mary starting to grow in the church at this time. And this is a church that in Trastevere that really embodies that. All right, Ryan. And the last place that I want to make sure we talk about today is it's a little outside of Rome. When I read about it, first I was kind of like, boy, I don't know why I had never heard of this before. But secondly, I was like, I absolutely have to prioritize doing this, which is a place called Ostia Antica. And Ostia Antica has basically two distinctions in the history of Rome. The first is it's sort of the city of Rome's first acquisition, first colony as it started to grow and expand. And the second distinction is because Ostia is a port city. It was a major commercial hub for the Roman Empire before they expanded even further, went further out, built a much grander port city. And Ostia Antica, while it functioned for hundreds of years, it eventually was abandoned for the larger port city and got silted up, and that mud and sort of swamp-like atmosphere actually preserved the road, the land, the mosaics, and so it does have it has been excavated now, and you can browse and really conjure up what this bustling city must have been like.
That's really fun. Old fort cities are especially cool, I think.
Yeah, and you can get there 45 minutes, easy train ride from Rome. And it was a port into the Tiber River. So it's that same river that you crossed over when you went to Trastevere. And the Roman Navy was here for a time, lots of trade going on. And so it has all those quintessential things anyone who's visited, Bath in England or Pompeii or any of these well-preserved Roman cities. It's got a bathhouse, warehouses where things like grain would have been stored to be put on ships and taken off ships. There are private homes, both for upper class, lower class people who are living there. And, one of my favorite things to try to seek out in museums and in ruins is mosaics, which have often stood the test of time. They maintain color, they maintain the characters that are presented. And here you get a mix of religious and commercial, so you can see some of the gods. There's one main plaza where mosaics in the ground were basically signs for the illiterate as to what the business was behind it. So you can get a guide, and it sort of takes you through that. And there's even a well-preserved theater. I mean, I almost think it's like silly how quintessentially Roman is that you get the bathhouse and the theater.
Well, what do you do after the theater?
All right. Okay. We don't need to get into your personal life. And I personally, just because of the business I'm in, there's a very well-preserved restaurant where they actually have a painting on the wall that broadcasts what they serve. There's food, there's drink, and so clearly a place to unwind after a day down at the docks.
Did they? Was it also sort of a vegan forward menu? Is that where the?
Okay, I do want to clarify. It's a vegetarian restaurant. That's an important line. We've got eggs, we've got cheese, we've got milk. We are not a vegan restaurant, right. Clover here in Boston.
Eggs are not vegetarian, but fine.
What are you talking about? Eggs are vegetarian.
Eggs are just future chickens,
The vegetarians eat eggs. Vegans do not eat eggs.
Well, if I met a vegetarian and they were eating an egg, I'd question it, but that's fine. That's fine.
All right. Well, we've strayed pretty far from Ostia Antica here, but I highly recommended it. It is worth your time, particularly if you're in Rome for like a week and you can do 2 days Vatican exploration, 2 or 3 days Rome exploration. You're going to have time to go out and do a quick 45-minute jaunt out. So I would put Ostia Antica on that itinerary.
I think it's incredible that we were able to tell people everything to do in Rome in 2 episodes, and it took 5 for Boston. So that's,
No,
you would
listen.
think that
Listen, I've got like 10 other Rome. To be honest, I've got to go back to Rome to do a whole bunch. I
Yeah.
actually, when I was preparing for this episode, I was going back through the guidebooks that I had used when I was there, and I have lists in there on index cards that I had of all the very ambitious things I wanted to see. And as you're pointing out, we've just scratched the surface. Rome is this place that Catherine and I have this dream that in retirement we would spend 6 months living in Rome, just exploring. Because we've covered the big museums. In such a rich archaeological city, there are these tiny museums that focus on just one little piece of the empire. And I would love to have the time to just, hit one of those each day for 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds incredible. Sign me up. When we have a 3 weeks free, let's do it.
Yeah, well, listen, you're a man on the move.
It's
Well,
true.
speaking of on the move, I think it's time we head to the last stop.
The last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
Now, Ryan, this is the last segment of the show, the final segment of the show. That's why it's called The Last Stop. It's my favorite segment. It's your favorite segment, and it's popularly known as the People's segment. Sometimes people just hear People's segment. That's the last stop, just if you're just getting your feet under yourself. And it's a great time. It's a great segment, and that's because it has this feeling of community, especially during these tough times, these insecure times. It's where we come together and share, particularly you and I, because we each bring one thing, and it could be anything. It could be a tale. It could be a memory. It could be an itinerary. It could be a news piece. It could be a souvenir. But it must inspire the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the work-a-day week. So, Ryan, I'm going to ask you on this work-a-day, can you inspire my wanderlust? Do you have a last stop this week?
I do, Kieran. You know how you and I are always talking about that sometimes sometimes it's just the perfect time to visit a place, like when I went to Cuba, and it's much more difficult to go now.
Yes.
Well, there's this guy, Peter Zion, who I really like. He's like a global strategist. He wrote this book on like big picture population decline, in the next 100 years. And he has a 2-part video series out on the future of tourism, where
Mm.
he says these are the places you should go now because in 10 years they might not be stable enough to go.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so one of those places is Brazil, and another is India. And I haven't been to
Interesting.
either of those places.
No,
And
nor have I.
yeah, and he talks about how with Brazil, the inequality situation is getting out of hand, and it's at some point it won't be sustainable. And in India, they're going to deal with this sort of population crisis at the same time that they're dealing with climate change and other things. And so his message is, if you want to see some of these places, you should go now and not wait till you retire. So yeah, I'll link in the show notes. Really interesting take. And this is a guy who travels every day. He's out there all the time. And yeah, that's my that is my last stop, thinking about places I want to make sure I get to.
Very cool.
Did you bring a last stop for us, Kieran?
I did indeed, and I'm going to keep on the Roman theme here because there was a news piece this week that I just think speaks to how even when you think you've seen all the sculpture, it seems like people cannot put a shovel in the ground without hitting an archaeological treasure in Rome. And sure enough, just this past week, the mayor of Rome put out on Facebook a post that they're doing excavation as part of Italy's National Recovery and Resilience Plan. And they are excavating an area that was Trajan's Forum. So this is the Emperor
Ooh.
Trajan of Trajan Columns fame. And there's a little description. This was basically a big courtyard that Trajan was building, a public plaza with temples and a library, and it was meant to celebrate some victories of wars he was leading. Actually, Hadrian, who we talked about extensively, Hadrian built a temple to Trajan as part of Trajan's Forum, and they're recovering this whole area. And sure enough, they discovered an enormous marble head And it is, it's been buried for centuries. It's well preserved. The public posts, and I'll put this up on the Instagram and link to it in the show notes. It's that kind of classic marble Roman head. None of the paint or anything is still on it, and they're trying to figure out who this is. They have some theories that it might have come from the top of a pillar as part of the forum, but it will be to come. And so this is, incredibly exciting stuff. I love when new things get excavated in Rome. And if you keep your eye on it or set some Google alerts, you'll get a few of these a year.
And do you think that maybe now there's just some guy with the head going around, one of the museums, seeing if it fits anywhere? Is that, or like, how do they do it?
Yeah, I think some guy just walks around toting
like,
a 30-foot marble head, tries to put it on a small statue. No, I don't think it's this one.
Yeah, Kieran, I think the statue is going to be quite large. I think
that's a fair point.
Start with the big statues missing heads, and then go from there.
I just think if you're going into archaeology, I recommend moving to Rome. I think it's probably one of the more guaranteed places to have a gig.
Yeah, I think Rome and Peru, two places you can probably find a gig anytime you're looking for one.
Good call. Good call. So Ryan, as proud patriots, and you're about to head out of the country, I want to wish you a happy 4th of July this coming weekend.
I just want you to remember me. I'm going to be on a horse. There's going to be fireworks behind me. It's going to be like a scene out of Brokeback Mountain.
All right. Wasn't exactly where I thought our July 4th celebratory comments would be going, but sure, Brokeback Mountain. I like to think of it as the fireworks at the end of Star Wars when the second Death Star gets destroyed.
We each have different.
We have different reference points. I think we've revealed a lot about ourselves there.
Well, until then, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kieran Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken. Oh, God. Don't sit here, folks.